What it's like to be a poet, a reluctant king, and the last emperor of a mighty dynasty, all at once. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and tragic tale of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, whose life was a blend of royalty, rebellion, and poetry. The year is 1857. The Mughal Empire, once sprawling and formidable, has withered down to a shadow of its former glory. But even as the empire crumbles, Delhi, the heart of Mughal India, still throbs with life, art, and culture. At the helm of this fading world sits Bahadur Shah Zafar, a man caught between the grandeur of the past and the harsh reality of the present. Zafar was never supposed to be emperor. He ascended the throne as a compromise, a ruler in name but with little real power. Yet, it was under his rule that one of the most significant events in Indian history unfolded, the Revolt of 1857, or as the British called it, the Indian Mutiny. Born in 1775, Bahadur Shah Zafar was the son of Akbar II, but his life was far from what you might expect of a prince. His reign began in 1837, but by then, the Mughal Empire was a mere puppet, controlled by the British East India Company. Zafar's empire was reduced to Delhi and its surrounding regions, with little to no political power. But Zafar wasn't just a ruler, he was a poet, a mystic, and a man deeply in love with the arts. His court was a hub of cultural activity, attracting poets, artists, and intellectuals. He wrote ghazals, poetic expressions of love, loss, and longing, that still resonate today. As the British tightened their grip on India, Zafar's court became a center of anti-British sentiment. The Revolt of 1857 was a culmination of this anger, a fierce, widespread rebellion against British rule. The rebels saw Zafar as a symbolic figurehead, a unifying force for their cause. Although he was hesitant and reluctant, Zafar was eventually thrust into a leadership role that would define his legacy. The rebellion, however, was brutally crushed. The British recaptured Delhi, and Zafar was arrested, tried, and exiled to Rangoon, Burma, where he would spend the last years of his life in isolation. His once thriving court was dismantled, his family was scattered, and the Mughal dynasty came to a tragic end. But Zafar's story doesn't end there. His poetry, filled with sorrow and resignation, gives us a window into the heart of a man who saw his world crumble around him. Lines like, Lagta nahan hai dil mera you jade daya mine, kis ki bani hai alam ena paida mine, reflect the deep despair he felt in exile. His death in 1862 marked not just the end of a dynasty, but the end of an era in Indian history. Bahadur Shah Zafar wasn't just the last Mughal emperor, he was a symbol of a world in transition, a bridge between the old and the new, between the grandeur of the Mughal Empire and the dawn of British rule. His life, filled with poetry, politics, and personal loss, continues to echo in the annals of history and in the verses he left behind. Why did Zafar fail? Bahadur Shah Zafar failed for several reasons, rooted in both his personal limitations and the broader historical context of his time. Let's break down the key factors that contributed to his failure. 1. Lack of real power. By the time Zafar ascended to the throne in 1837, the Mughal Empire was a shadow of its former self. The British East India Company had already established its dominance over large parts of India, and Zafar's authority was largely symbolic. He ruled over Delhi, but even within this limited territory, his power was more ceremonial than actual. The British controlled the real power, including military and administrative authority. 2. Reluctance and indecision. Zafar was a reluctant leader during the Revolt of 1857. When the rebellion broke out, many Indian soldiers and leaders saw him as a unifying figure against the British, but Zafar himself was hesitant. He was an elderly man by then, more focused on poetry and spiritual pursuits than on politics or warfare. His indecision and lack of enthusiasm for the rebellion contributed to its disorganization and eventual failure. 3. Poorly coordinated rebellion. The Revolt of 1857 was not a centrally organized movement. It was a series of loosely coordinated uprisings by various groups with different goals. Zafar, who was thrust into the leadership role by the rebels, struggled to bring unity among the various factions. Without a unified command and clear strategy, the rebellion was vulnerable to British counterattacks, which were brutal and effective. 4. British military superiority. The British forces were far better equipped and organized compared to the rebel forces. They had superior weapons, disciplined troops, and a well-established communication network. Despite facing initial setbacks, the British regrouped and launched a fierce campaign to suppress the rebellion. The lack of modern military resources and strategic planning on the part of the rebels, combined with Zafar's limited military experience, made it difficult to sustain the rebellion. 5. Limited support base. Zafar's support base was limited to Delhi and a few surrounding areas. The Mughal Empire had long since lost its influence over the broader Indian subcontinent, and many regional rulers and princes either remained neutral or supported the British during the revolt. This lack of widespread support weakened the rebellion and isolated Zafar. 6. British diplomatic tactics. The British were adept at using diplomacy and divide-and-rule tactics to undermine the rebellion. They made deals with certain Indian rulers, played on existing rivalries, and used propaganda to discredit the rebels and Zafar. These tactics further weakened the rebellion and Zafar's position. 7. Harsh British reprisals. After the rebellion was suppressed, the British responded with brutal reprisals. Zafar was captured, tried, and exiled to Rangoon, modern-day Yangon, Myanmar. His family was either executed or scattered, and the Mughal dynasty was formally abolished. The severe consequences imposed by the British ensured that any remnants of support for Zafar or the Mughal dynasty were crushed. Conclusion: Bahadur Shah Zafar failed not because of a lack of personal qualities, but because he was a ruler without real power, caught in a moment of history where the forces against him were overwhelming. His reluctance, combined with the disorganized nature of the rebellion and the superior might of the British, sealed his fate. Zafar's failure was emblematic of the decline of the Mughal Empire and the rise of British colonial rule in India. Thanks for watching, and meet you in the next video.